All right, guys, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, thank you for coming. My name is Nathan Magniez. My course is going to be on exploit redirection, or just redirection in general. A little bit about myself. My name is Nathan Magniez. Like I said, I'm an instructor, TCS, telecommunication systems, for the art of exploitation. Do some contracting work, unfortunately, sometimes too. Also started HackHunger.com, and I work with Hackers for Charity now in their Food for Work program. So check that out at the HFC booth if you get a chance. Some other non-important things I like: beer, especially when it's free, other things. All right, so let's get down to the details of the course, or the talk. Redirection, when we talk about it, there's some common terminology that's associated with it. A lot of people refer to it as proxies or jump points, pivots, redirectors, tunnels, tunneling. They all technically mean the same thing, and they can be product specific. So like if you're saying, like, I'm going to pivot my exploit from this, usually you're talking about like core impact or something like that. We're going to talk about, I'm going to refer to it as a redirector. So by standard, a proxy, basically, everyone should be probably familiar with what a proxy does. It accepts your packets, strips the header, adds their header, and sends them off to their next or final destination. So as an example, like Tor, start up Tor browser, go out to a website. From the perspective of the end target, it looks like the last hop on the Tor browser was the one that hit the website. So it's just a way to anonymize yourself or keep your tracks hidden from the end target. An example with the command line, I'm just connecting through Netcat to a proxy to some IP in Brazil on Squid proxy 3128, telling it instead of getting its stuff to go ahead and out and go grab the website for me. So why do we want to use this? Well, there's a few different reasons: anonymity and bypassing security controls. Yes, Alice does have a Guy Fawkes mask on in that picture. So to be anonymous, bypass firewalls or ACLs where our traffic may be blocked in certain situations from external sources to an internal target. We may have to use some sort of like DMZ web server to get into that internal network. That's what we're going to talk about here. Some things we can do: be malicious, be anonymous. Running our exploits through the proxies. If you have multiple proxies, which is good tradecraft, keeping a few different proxies between you and your end target, that's always the best thing to do. And that's what we're going to talk about: how to get our packets, whether they be malicious or not, into that internal network. All right, so exploitation without redirection. Standard firewall blocking external hosts into it, whether it's by port or by IP. Let's say we're throwing an exploit to an internal host on an SMB port, or 389 on LDAP. It should be blocked by any router or firewall out there. So we're not able to get our exploit packets in. Sometimes the internal host, or your let's say she's a domain controller, and we want to get into that internal network and get the domain controller because it's got the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. But we may have to go about it in a different way. We may have to attack a few other machines in between us and our internal host. Specifically, let's say we attacked an internal web server. We have command line access. We have a shell on him. We have a backdoor. We can call into it. We put our tools on there. We're going to put a tool and tell it to accept our packets and then send them on. And then we could also have multiple proxies in between us and this DMZ web server to further anonymize ourselves as well. So we're going to go ahead and use his ability because we have command line access to do whatever we want on him. We've probed either through like HPing or something to see what protocols and what ports are allowed through to the internal network. We've realized that we can utilize him to get our packets through the firewall because he's a trusted server on that network, and get it into our internal host and bypass the firewall. All right, so one of the concerns with redirection is logging, and it is a concern, but it could also be not a concern because a lot of end-user systems don't actually log. If they do, they don't maintain them. And then correlation, as it's bolded, is a complete nightmare. So imagine trying to, if you have 7 different proxies between me and my end target, from the standpoint of the end target, it's my last hop that attacked him. But then he's got to correlate that log with the previous proxy and then all the way back to me. So it can be a nightmare. Side note, if you really want to be malicious, go ahead and pick proxies in different countries that don't play well together and don't talk to each other or do diplomacy that well. Iran, Israel. As a side note, that may start World War III, so just be careful. All right, so how do I find a proxy? Well, that could be a totally different talk entirely. The short answer to that, basically you can do an in-map scan for well-known proxy ports. There are online lists that have well-known proxies out there as well. The logging may be of concern to you then as well. You can also go about getting an anonymous VPN subscription, and that talk could take another hour on its own just by that, how to actually get a non-attributed account to yourself where it's totally anonymous. Previously hacked machines that you've already owned, they're good and they're in, you don't longer need them for data mining, you're done with them, you can use them now as a redirector. Online proxy lists like the ones I had before, well-known proxies out there, and test them out and see if they actually send your packets on for you. All right, so auto magic redirection. I added this slide in a little bit earlier today. A lot of tools will do redirection for you, like Core Impact or Metasploit, and they'll do it auto magically, right? So why even have to learn this? Well, a lot of times you're not going to be able to. You might find yourself in a forward deployed situation or somewhere tactically where you don't have access to those tools that you're used to. Just say right-click, pivot, run the exploit from here. You're going to need to know how to use these standalone tools or some sort of tool set to go ahead and upload it there, put it on that machine, and understand it really is a simplistic thing, redirection, when you look at it on the big picture, like in a displayed out. But when you get to the command line and start typing these things out, you can get lost in the sauce pretty fast, especially when you have multiple terminals open on multiple machines and you have a limited amount of real estate on your screen here. And you have 5 different terminal screens in Pakistan or wherever you're at, and then you have your local host. Mapping this all out can be a little bit of a nightmare, but getting it to understand it, we're going to want to go ahead and learn how to do it the hard way. All right, so how do we do this? What do we need to do this? Since it's Alice in Wonderland themed, the hare and the hatter are referred to as the king's messengers, one to come and one to go, and it fits well kind of with my tool that I'm going to talk about, which is data pipe. We're going to put a tool up there. It's called data pipe. It's going to accept our packets on one port to come in and then send them out to another machine to go out on. The tool is called data pipe. It's a very simple tool. It supports bidirectional TCP traffic only. You only have to set up one pipe and it will take care of the bidirectional traffic. You don't have to worry about the return traffic. It is a persistent process, meaning you'll have to kill it. It doesn't close out after the initial connection, so it will stay a resident on that system. And it is Unix and Windows compatible as well, so that's also pretty cool. And we can utilize it to get around those situations like I talked about before with firewalls or ACLs or that sort of deal. The usage is relatively simple. I'm going to talk about that here in a second. And it was originally from Jeff Lawson. It's been modified a little bit for our scenario. The syntax, like any command out there, think of it as an imperative statement to that machine. Data pipe, local interface, local port, remote IP, remote port. So data pipe, I want you to listen on any interface, the 0.0.0.0 on 443, and go ahead and redirect it off to this remote machine or this internal machine on 0.65 on port 139. So any traffic that comes to you on 443, so the redirector machine, accept those packets and send them on to this machine on port 139. And you can do this with whatever port you want, as long as the port's not already bound. So just like you can't start a netcat listener on a port that's already bound, you can't tell data pipe to bind to a port. So if 443 was bound, it would give us an error. So as long as the port's not bound, you can go ahead and tell it to do it. All right, so redirection, like we saw in that previous slide, this is what it looked like from the command line. So we have connection to our machine, we connect into our back door, we have the command line, we put up our tools, we put up data pipe. The command line usage is pretty simple. We start in the background, start/b, datapipe.exe 0.0.0, listen on 443, accept any packets that come to me, and then redirect them off to this internal host, 1010.1070 on port 389. All right, so now I send the exploit packets actually at the hacked web server on that port 443. He accepts them. He's able to talk to the the internet because he's a web server. He accepts those packets and then sends them on the data pipe chain to the actual host I'm trying to attack. And we've tested, and however you've enumerated this network and seeing that you can get these packets through is kind of up to you at that point. And seeing what's allowed through. Once it's started, you can verify that it's listening through a simple netstat and verify that data pipe is indeed accepting those packets. All right, so we have two different exploitation scenarios. The first one we're going to talk about, we have an internal host that we've identified. It's a Windows 2000 domain controller. So obviously we want it. It's going to be easy to own at this point. However, there is something in between us and him that's blocking our packets from getting to that host initially. We already have the web server in the target's DMZ, so we already own this box at this point. We've enumerated that we can get packets through, and so we're going to go ahead and push our exploit code up to that hacked web server and push data pipe up there as well. Run a data pipe so we can get through. Once the exploit does its thing, we can check our shell that it binds to and get into that internal network. So I'm going to put my exploit up to that DMZ web server and run it directly from that Windows attack machine as well. So from the command line, everyone see that it's a little small for those in the back. I'm starting a data pipe. Basically, I'm telling it to listen on an interface on port 8080. Now this is the command line of the hacked machine that I already own. So I put my tool set up there, I connect to my backdoor, put my tools up, I tell it to listen on port 8080, and then any packets that come to the hacked web server, I want it to redirect to the internal host 27.107 on port 1427. The exploit that you use is really up to you. At this point, it's just, we're going to use DCOM. It's an older exploit, it's very stable, and the port that it goes against is 135 by default. So that's kind of important because we can't get that through the firewall initially, because SMB, by anything worth its weight in gold, should be blocked from external sources into an internal network. So we put our exploit code up to that web server. The syntax for DCOM is relatively simple. DCOM, specify a destination host, which is going to be that internal machine, the domain controller. Tell it a type of machine it is. In this case, it's Windows 2000. And then tell it to bind to a port if it is successful, a command shell. So in this case, I think it defaults to port 666. We did it to 1427. If you see that 1427 correlates back to the data pipe session I just previously set up. So I'm going to exploit it. If it's successful, I'm going to use my attack platform to connect to my web server, and then he's going to data pipe my netcat connection on through to 1427, where if DCOM or whatever exploit you're using did its magic, you should have a command shell bound to that port waiting for you to get command line access to it. So we hit enter, it goes off, exploits the target. It tells us, hey, it's successful. You can now connect to the remote computer on the port you specified. So you test your shell, netcat from our local machine, from the internet to the DMZ to inside the internal host. So from our local command line, netcatting onto the hacked web server. In this case, he's 27.102 on port 8080, where we just previously set up data pipe, right? Data pipe's going to accept those connections in and allow it to go through. As you can see, I got dropped into a shell, run an IP config just to verify where I'm at. And you can see I'm on 27.107, which was my in target. And so I'm basically just going right through that proxy into my internal host. Now that's just one data pipe in this scenario. It can get a lot more complex when you start talking about adding in multiple proxies, doing good tradecraft in between you and your in target. All right, so it worked, we're in. But there was a critical flaw in what we just talked about. Where did we go wrong? Well, where did we put that exploit code at? On that hacked web server, right? We lost physical control of our exploit code. Now that doesn't really matter for, Metasploit modules or something like that maybe, or exploit code that's old. But if you're talking about like a 0-day, or you work in a shop where there's research and development, and those exploits cost a lot of money, you're not going to want to ever lose physical control of your exploit code. So that adds a layer of complexity. How do I get my, in this case, a NetBIOS exploit through into an internal host when I know NetBIOS ports are blocked? Well, we can use some more redirection here. All right, so we have us, the attacker, we have our internal host, and we also have our compromised host. And at our disposal, we also have a Unix machine on our local network as well that we can utilize. Well, we know the compromised host is a Windows host, a Windows machine, and we know the internal host is a Windows 2000 box 2. Like I said, data pipe cannot bind to a port that's already bound. And guess what Windows machines have bound usually? NetBIOS ports, right? So I'm going to need to redirect my exploit through a machine that doesn't have NetBIOS ports bound by default, which is Linux. So if we try to exploit the domain controller directly, it's going to get blocked by that the device that we talked about earlier. So we're going to go ahead and need to redirect our exploit through onto the domain controller. In the previous scenario, we lost physical control over exploit code because we uploaded it directly to that compromised host that we do not physically own. We own it, right, but we don't physically own it. So we're going to go ahead and need to redirect it through. We can't tell data pipe to bind to port 135 because he should already have it bound. So we need to go ahead and do another redirection through the Unix attack host. We set up a data pipe session on him, tell him to listen on port 135, redirect it to the compromised host's IP on 1350, and then on to the domain controller there. So the compromised host is going to go ahead and listen on 1350, redirect it to the domain controller on port 135, where DCOM should go ahead and bind a shell just like we saw in the previous scenario. So I throw DCOM directly at my Unix IP. It rides the data pipe chain all the way through, where in this syntax I'm telling it to bind to port 1070. So if this exploit is successful, I should have a shell waiting for me on the domain controller on 1070, or a command shell in this case. So I set up another data pipe. I still can't talk to this domain controller directly, right? There's still that device that's blocking access from external sources to the internal domain controller, by all means, should be. So I set up another data pipe just to check my shell. I put data pipe again on the compromised host, send it off, tell them to listen on 1070 just to keep it simple, and then go ahead and redirect it to the domain controller's IP address on 1072. So then I could test my shell, in this case, just point netcat directly at the compromised host and see if my shell worked. So that's 3 data pipes in this scenario just to see if the exploit worked, right? It can get a lot more complex really fast. This is not good tradecraft because we're coming directly from our local machine, right, out to the compromised host. Now he has our IP address. So good tradecraft would say you probably need at least 3 in between you and your in target. So can you see where multiple data pipes and redirection can get pretty heinous pretty fast? I've seen it commonly with students. I've seen data pipes redirect into themselves. People not realizing what command shell they're actually in. The concept of, what is this big black box that I'm working in? Everyone's used to the GUI. So what I recommend to people that with redirection is to draw it out logically, like a roadmap. Say, this is my compromised host, this is where I want to go, I need to set X, Y, and Z data pipe up on these hops along the way, just to keep things logically straight in your mind. Also change the background color of your terminal so it keeps it clear, like green for your local box, or however you want to do it. Keep things straight in your head. But I definitely recommend it either clicks right away, you either recognize this and you get it, or there's going to be something that you're going to do tomorrow or maybe later on, and there's going to be some sort of mnemonic device that's just going to pop in your head. It's like, oh, okay, I get it. It's just a simple proxy. I need to set up my pipes and have my exploit goes through. But I definitely recommend drawing it out Crayola style. I do it all the time. I mean, I'm not afraid to admit it. I draw it out. Otherwise, I can't keep everything straight in my head. All right, so what does that look like from the command line? This might be a little bit hard for the people in the back to see. I did a pre-packaged one because I didn't know how much time I was going to have to do this. So in this scenario, we're going to have basically what we just saw in a nice, pretty illustration, but from the actual aspect of seeing it on the command line. So we're going to have 3 different terminal shells you're going to see here. We're going to have our remote host, which is the compromised host that we just, the web server that we already own. We connect to its backdoor. It's running some version of CryptCat or something like that. We're connected into the remote host. We also have the local host tab up here, and then you're going to see a Linux shell appear as well through a virtual machine. So if I can find my mouse. Make sure our tools are on the remote system. Data pipe is up there. From our Linux attack platform, we're setting up that initial data pipe, so /data pipe or whatever you want to name it so it blends in a little bit better. 0.0.0, listen on 135, the NetBIOS port, redirected on to 172.16.10.10, and our lab network on 1350, just like we saw previously. All right, so the remote host, we set up our first data pipe on the Linux system. Now we're on the compromised host, the one that's in the DMZ. We tell it to start data pipe down here, 0.0, listen on 1350, which the Unix IP address should be sending to it on 1350, and then redirect it on to the internal host, the domain controller in this case, 10.3 on port 135. So this is our data pipe session for our exploit code at this point. Oops, actually don't hit enter, I hit next, there we go. Since we're already at the command line, we're setting up our secondary data pipe. This is to check our shell if our exploit is successful. So I tell data pipe to start another process on 2525. So listen on 2525. Anything that comes to you on 2525, redirect it on to 10.3 on 2525. Now this is port 2525, I've said that 80 million times now, is going to be the port that we tell DCOM to go ahead and bind the shell to. Verifying that we're not accidentally in France or something like that, just doing an IP config. Make sure you're on the right system. Again, keeping it straight in your head is critical. All right, so on our local host, we're going to throw our exploit so we don't lose physical control of it. Throw my exploit at my Linux VM. Internally, it's going to accept those packets, redirect it on to the compromised host in between in the DMZ, and the DMZ is going to redirect it on to the internal host. So I hit enter. I point it at my local Unix platform here, 0.31 in this scenario. Specify the type of the remote system on the way far end of the data pipeline, and tell it if it is successful, I want you to bind a bind a shell to port 2525. So I hit enter, and hey, it worked. Yay! So it tells me I can now connect to the remote computer on the port you specified. Well, that's 2525. So now we can go ahead and use netcat or whatever you want to do to go ahead and test our shell, just like we saw in the nice illustration. Connect over to our local Linux IP address, or excuse me, the remote, the compromised host IP address on 2525, and we should be dropped into a shell. And there we have it. We get in. Now what do we do? Well, that's a totally different talk as well. Put your tools up there. Put git system in this case. Put your backdoor on. Get the files. Hack all the things. Right. Get the SAM database. Crack it. Rainbow tables. Whatever you want to do at that point. All right. So, does anyone have any questions so far on that? Go ahead.
Couldn't you eliminate the Unix host by just running data pipe on your local attacker machine and point your
well, your local attack machine is a Windows host too.
Well,
so,
you could run Linux.
Yes, exactly. That was the Linux machine, but the exploit code we had was for a Windows.
Or you could shut down file sharing to turn off on.
Exactly. You could do that, but yeah, in this scenario, DCOM helps illustrate the point of having to do multiple data pipes in certain particular scenarios. But yes, there's different options. It all depends on the exploit code that you're actually using. All right, so that was the demo. There are other tools out there that can support redirection. Some of them are listed up here. By far, data pipe is the easiest to learn on or teach somebody about redirection because the syntax is so simple. It's listen on this interface on this port and then redirect it to a remote system on that port. SSH can get a little confusing because you got to SSH to the remote machine, then bind a port to your local box, and then it just gets a little heinous to teach on. But by far, there are other tools that can do this, and they support UDP as well, or encryption, which is good if you don't want people capturing your packets, right? Seeing what you're doing or giving away your tradecraft or your exploit code. So we have SSH that can do it, SOCAT can do it as well, and FPipe can do it too, but the syntax, in my opinion, is not the easiest to learn on by default. That's pretty much it. I guess I have some time for questions if anyone has any. I just have some things for people up there. DataPipe is available. It's originally from Jeff Lawson. There's the website to grab DataPipe if you want. I believe we're going to have it at Jump ESP as well, our version of DataPipe that we use for this. Play with it in a lab, tunnel into yourself, tunnel into multiple targets, and get practice with it. Some other things, be like Good Guy Greg. Go support Hackers for Charity if you got a few extra dollars. Stop by the booth and pick up some shirts. Here, you guys can have some now. Oh, sorry. Bombs away. Does anyone have any questions so far? All right, go ahead. 5 minutes. All right. If you guys look under your seats, you may have a sticker underneath there. If you have the pink sticker, You won the baseball bat, and I will chuck it to you. Anyone have a pink sticker? Anyone have an orange sticker?
Stuck on the chair?
Should be underneath, right, Lloyd?
Yeah. Do not do
No stickers. It's a big cramp.
Social engineering. Does anyone have a sticker? No?
Oh, I got one.
You have the blue one?
Yep.
We got orange.
You got orange? Okay, I called orange second, so. You won the baseball bat.
Good.
Congratulations.
Have fun playing.
Does anyone have any questions on data pipe or redirection at all? The scenario that we presented? Go ahead.
If you find a speeder has data pipe, how easy is it to find out who's using it?
The question is, if data pipe is on the system,
Yeah.
how easy is it to see that it's running?
See who put it there.
Who put it there? Well, that would be all your logging. That'd be more the forensic side. But you can hide. There's multiple ways to hide. Like say it's on a Linux system, we can use some command line foo, like using the echo command to pipe it into itself, so it actually executes. It doesn't. You know how in Linux it will show the exact command line you type, like the dot slashes and everything. There's ways to hide it that way. But as far as seeing who's utilizing it, as long as you hide the process well, no one's going to, be aware that it's running. As long as you pick a good port to listen on,
Evil binary, not a good name.
Yeah, evil binary.exe is not good. But other than that, it would come down to it's just going to start a listener on a port. So you'd have to basically know that that port's not supposed to be listening on your system, and then find out. Like you could use fport, and it would show you what executable is running, where it's running out of, and what port it's actually associated with. That's a tool you can use to try to identify what's holding open that particular port. Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
How many levels of redirection have you gotten to work with data pipe before it's crossed out?
So with anything on the internet, don't assume that you did it wrong. You could have done it wrong, but if you're awesome, you don't do it wrong, right? Any glitch in the system in between you and your in target can cause a failure. So it could cause your packet, like a router goes down in Kerplakistan, right? And now that's one of our critical jumps to where we're going in, the other part of Kerplakistan. But how many data pipes can we get running together?
How many have you got?
I mean, I've done like 5 in the lab environment, but I mean, theoretically, you could do it through the world, as long as the routes are good and the routers are up and packets are still flowing. I mean, you could redirect to yourself as well and then have it loop like that too. I mean, theoretically, you could just chain, computer to computer to computer to computer.
If you're doing a really long one, you
Yeah.
start to have to consider some additional latency getting involved.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if you start adding a lot of them, I mean, a good tradecraft would be at least 3 in between you and your in target, just to keep anonymity. But I mean, if you have that many proxies or that many boxes that you already own, you might own a botnet at that point. Anyone else? All right. Thank you. Questions? Send me an email. Also, I just got another email account, Nathan at Hackers for Charity. So send me an email there if you need to, or come visit us at the booth. Come visit us if you have time, if you're not leaving on an airplane right now. Ask us any questions afterwards. I'll be outside here. I got to get off stage, though, for the next speaker. So thank you guys for coming. I appreciate it. Have a good day. Enjoy the rest of your con.